Hello, my name is Shalabieh, and I will be telling you a story called The Lemon, an Arabic folktale. I hope you enjoy it. Once upon a time, a long time ago, there lived a woodcutter and his wife. Their names were Fahim and Fahimeh. They led a simple life. Fahim would go out and cut wood and sell it in the market for a little bit of money, and Fahimeh would help with some work around the house, whether it was taking in laundry, embroidery and sewing, or any little odd job she could do. One day when Fahim was out cutting wood, Fahimeh was sitting on the stoop doing some sewing when she heard the town crier go by. Ya Ahl al-Madinah, Ya Ahl al-Balad, اللي بده يغير أحواله، اللي بده يحسن أوضاعه يتجه للملك. يا أهل المدينة، يا أهل البلد. And off he went. She couldn't wait till her husband came back to tell him what she had heard, and when Fahim came, she excitedly sat him down and said, Fahim, the town crier came by and he said that anyone who wants to better his lot should go to the king. Fahim looked at her quizzingly and said, but we have a comfortable life, we have a simple life, we have a roof over our heads, we have food on our table, we're okay, we don't need a betterment. At which point she looked at him and shook her head and said, but my darling, if you do not seek, you shall not find. You must try. And she convinced him that night. So the next morning, he put on his best clothes and walked out the door. But as he was walking out, she held him back and said, but where do you think you're going? I'm going to a betterment, to the king. Isn't that what you wanted? Yes, but it is rude to enter into one's home for the first time empty-handed. You cannot go like this. Fahim looks around and looks at her, but we have nothing to gift a king. There is nothing here that is worthy of a king. She told him to wait and went inside, and in a small purse where she had been saving some money, she took a coin. It was a small red coin, not worth much, irsh, and she gave it to him and said, my darling, as you walk towards the palace, the first person you see selling anything, that will be your gift to the king. You buy it with this coin. He put it in his pocket and said, okay. And off he went. And as he walked, he heard, Asfar ya limon, Hamid ya limon, Asfar ya limon, Hamid ya limon. And he came to an old woman sitting in front of a big pile of beautiful fresh lemons. She was sitting there ready to sell her big, juicy, fat lemons. And there he stood in front of her and he put out his coin and he said, can I buy some lemons? The old woman looked at the coin and looked at him and scoffed. You want to buy my lemons with this coin? These lemons are fresh. This is the first pick of the harvest. They're expensive. Your coin won't buy anything. But he looked at her and said, but I am going for the betterment of my lot at the king's, and I don't want to walk in empty-handed. Will you please give me at least a lemon? And she looked at him and said, I will not stand in your way. And she chose a big, beautiful lemon and gave it to him in exchange for his red coin. And off he went. And as he arrived at the palace gates, he stood in awe of this beautiful metal work. And the doors were open and he walks through, and it is a garden of splendor with roses, jasmine, palm trees, and even a fountain. He walks up the palace steps and through a magnificent wooden door that is decorated with brass. And from room to room to room, he arrives at the diwan, the royal court. And there he finds a line that is snaking through the room, and he puts himself in it. And he keeps getting closer, one step at a time, until it is his time for an audience with the king. They announce him, "Fahim the woodcutter," and he bows in front of the king, "Your Majesty." And as he raises his head, he looks at the king and says, "Your Majesty, before I ask for any betterment, may I offer you this humble gift from your humble servant?" And he pulls out the lemon. The court hushes in silence. Who gives a lemon to a king? They all hold their breath, waiting to see what the king will do. The king calls Fahim and says, "Give me the lemon." He takes the lemon and sniffs it, orders a knife to be brought, and slices it open and takes a bite. It is juicy, it is sweet, it is sour, it is perfect. The king loves lemons. The king looks at Fahim and says, "I have been sitting here giving out gifts and betterments all day, and you are the first to bring me a gift. Sit down and wait for your betterment." And he continues with the court until it is lunchtime. And when lunch is announced and the people are sent away, Fahim is asked to join the king for lunch. Fahim is surprised by this honor and bows his head. They enter into a large dining hall, a table set for the king, the queen, prince, princess, all the counselors and advisors, and Fahim. There they sit, and the royal cook brings out a massive plate with rice piled high, and in the middle of the rice, a beautiful turkey. Crispy and golden brown, it was royal, it was gorgeous, it was beautiful, and it even still had the head of the bird on it. The royal cook places the bird in the center of the table and is about to take his knife out when the king says, "Stop! Give the knife to Fahim." And Fahim hears this and he is scared. The king was going to test him, and he looks at Fahim and says, "I want you to cut up this bird in the best way possible for those sitting around this table." Fahim's heart starts to patter. "But your Majesty, please, the cook is better suited for this than me." But the king won't have it. He wants Fahim to cut up the bird. And Fahim looks around. He sees the king, the queen, the prince, the princess, the advisors, the counselors. He takes a deep breath and makes the first cut. He places the head of the bird onto a plate and presents it to the king. Everyone is silent. Who gives the head of a turkey to the king? It has no meat. But the king is curious and he waits. Fahim goes back to the bird and cuts a wing and places it on a plate and the other wing on another plate. And he presents them to the prince and the princess. The room is still hushed and the king is not happy. Fahim pays no attention and goes back to the bird. He starts to cut up the legs of the turkey in equal sizes and places each plate in front of a advisor, a minister, or a counselor. At this point, the king is not happy. His leg starts to shake. How is it that he and his children got no meat, but these men, his servants, his advisors, his ministers, got some? He was fuming. Fahim pays him no heed. He turns the bird over, cuts out the backbone, places it in a plate, and puts it in front of the queen, and the king's eyebrows shoot up. Fahim goes back to the bird. The only thing left is the breast. He puts it, without cutting it in any way, in a plate and places it in front of himself, at which point the king's anger boils over and he shouts out, "Fahim, explain yourself. Is this the best way you've divided up this bird amongst us? What is this?" And Fahim calmly looks at the king and says, "Your Majesty, when I looked around the room, there was no other way to divide up this bird. Your Majesty, let me explain. When I placed the head in front of you, Your Majesty, it is because in the head lies the mind and lies wisdom. It is also where the crown sits. I could not give it to anyone else but Your Majesty." The king hears this and his eyebrows relax and his curiosity is piqued once again. Fahim continues, "As for the wings, Your Majesty, I could only give them to the prince and princess, because as they grow and as they learn and as they come into themselves, your heart will grow and flutter with pride. So I gave them the wings. And your visors and counselors and ministers, I gave them the thighs, because they are the ones who carry out your orders. They walk through the kingdom on your behalf. And the queen? Well, she is your backbone, so she cut the backbone. And what's left of the bird is the chest, the breast, and in there lies the heart, and in the heart lies love, and your people love you, and I represent the people, so I took the breast." Fahim, your name does suit you, for it does mean the wise one, the smart one, and that you have proven today. And because of that, your betterment will be to move into the palace and become one of my counselors. Fahim left that day with a bag of gold to better himself before he moves to the palace. And on his way home, he heard once again, "Asfar yelimun, Hamid yelimun, Asfar yelimun, Hamid yelimun." And so he stopped at the old woman's stall and gave her some of the gold as a reward for her kindness. And when they moved to the palace, he did become counselor, and the king looked to him often, because the king wanted a kingdom full of people who thought with their minds and not their bellies. Thank you for listening to my podcast and today's story. As I said, The Lemon is an Arabic folk tale. It was collected and published in Timeless Tales Volume I by the Arab Education Forum. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider supporting my Patreon. My Patreon link can be found in the story description, or you can find it by looking for Shalabieh Al Hakwatieh or Sally Shalabieh. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the story.